A boot slammed into an old man's chest. He staggered backward through the open door and out into the rain. His cane clattered across the wet gravel. Somebody laughed inside. Somebody else told him to keep crawling in the dirt. He hit the mud on his hands and knees, and the storm swallowed the sound. A young prospect stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him bleed. The cold rain ran down the old man's face. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He just reached for his cane and pulled himself up, one slow inch at a time. His name was Silas Rhodes, 74 years old, and the faded patch on the back of his soaked leather cut carried a name those boys should have known by heart. What happened when the national officers rolled in that night left every man in that bar speechless. Stay with me on this one. The storm had come out of nowhere. That happens in the high desert outside Barstow. One minute the sky is wide and quiet. The next, the wind is throwing sand sideways and the rain is coming down so hard you can't see the road in front of you. Silas Rhodes had been walking that road for a mile. His truck had died on the shoulder, and there was no cell signal out there, and there wasn't another building for 10 miles in any direction. Just the low cinder-block clubhouse with the neon sign and the row of motorcycles parked under the overhang. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was looking for a roof, a place to wait out the storm and maybe use a phone. That was all. Beside him walked a dog. An old blue heeler, gray around the muzzle, one ear torn from some fight years back. The dog's name was Diesel, and he was almost as old as any dog gets. He moved slow like his master, but he never fell more than a step behind. Where Silas went, Diesel went. 14 years, and that had never once changed. Silas pushed open the door and stepped inside out of the rain, and for a second nobody noticed him. There were maybe 8 of them in there. Young. Loud. Prospects and hang-arounds, the newest blood of the Iron Veil chapter, running the bar on a slow night while the patched members were somewhere else. Music thumping, pool balls cracking, a television with the sound off. Then the biggest one turned around. Shaved head, thick arms covered in ink, a chain hanging off his belt. His name was Cade, and he was 26 years old, and he had been a prospect for 8 months, and in his own mind, he already owned the place. "Hey," Cade said. "Hey, old man, this is a private club. You don't just walk in here." Silas took off his soaked hat. "My truck broke down," he said. His voice was quiet and rough like gravel under a tire. "I just need to use a phone, wait out the rain." Cade looked him up and down, and then he saw the cut. The old leather vest under Silas's coat, worn almost soft, the patches faded near white. Cade's face changed, not to respect, to something uglier. "Where'd you steal that?" he said. The room went quieter. A couple of the others drifted over. One of them, a wiry kid named Prospect Ricky, laughed through his nose. "Look at this. Grandpa's playing dress-up. You buy that at a swap meet, Pops." "I earned it," Silas said. Simple, flat. He wasn't angry. He'd been in rooms 100 times harder than this one, and he knew what a puffed chest looked like on a boy who'd never bled for anything. That was the wrong thing to say to Cade, because Cade had bled. He'd taken beatings to wear a patch that wasn't even a full patch yet, and here was some broken-down old man in a dead man's colors telling him he'd earned something. "Take it off," Cade said. "No. Take it off, or I take it off you." And then Diesel growled, low, from down near the floor. The old dog had planted himself between Silas and Cade, hackles up, teeth showing, standing his ground on legs that could barely hold him. Cade laughed. He actually laughed. "You gonna sick your dog on me?" "He's just protecting me," Silas said. "Same as I'd protect him. Call your boys off and we don't have a problem." But there was no calling anybody off. Ricky grabbed Silas by the collar. Another one shoved the dog with his boot, and Diesel yelped and stumbled, but he didn't run. Silas said one word sharp, "Diesel, down," And the dog dropped because 40 years of trust ran deeper than any fear. They dragged the old man to the door. He didn't fight. A man his age fighting 8 young men would only get himself killed, and Silas Rhodes had not lived 74 hard years by being a fool. He let them push him. And Cade planted that boot in his chest and sent him out into the mud, and threw the cane after him, and stood in the doorway laughing while an old man crawled in the rain. What none of them did, not one, was read the patches. If they had, everything that happened next would have gone a very different way. Diesel walked out into the storm on his own and lay down in the mud beside Silas. He would not come back inside no matter how they whistled. He put his gray head on the old man's leg and stayed there in the rain. The door slammed shut, and inside the boys went back to their music and their pool, thinking they'd won something, thinking it was over. They had no idea what they had just done, or to whom. Here's the thing about that clubhouse. It had a wall. Every chapter has one. A wall of photographs and plaques and names going all the way back to the day the charter was signed. Most of those boys walked past it a dozen times a day and never looked. It was just old stuff, old faces, dead men and gone men in black and white. And framed in the center of that wall behind cracked glass was the founding charter of the Iron Vale chapter, signed in ink that had gone brown with age. 9 names on it, 9 founders. And at the top of the list, in the position of the first road captain, the man who mapped every run and led every ride and kept the whole thing alive through its hardest years, was a single name. Silas Gunner Rhodes. The same man now lying in the mud outside their door. Nobody in that bar had ever met him. He'd stopped riding when the youngest of them was still in diapers. He'd faded into a name on a wall that nobody read. But every rule they lived by, every line of the code they claimed to protect, he had helped write. He'd bled for it on roads that were gone now, in fights that were only stories now, back when wearing these colors could get you killed and often did. Silas lay in the rain and looked up at the neon sign glowing through the storm. And he thought about calling it in. He still had a name that meant something. One phone call and men would come. But he was tired, and a part of him wanted to see what his club had become when nobody was watching, when they thought no one important was around. He didn't have to make the call, because somebody else already had. One of the younger prospects, a kid named Tomas who hadn't laughed with the others, had gone out back for a smoke and seen the old man crawling. And Tomas had done the thing you're supposed to do when something feels wrong. He'd looked. He'd walked over in the rain and crouched down and actually read the patches on that soaked old cut. The bottom rocker, the name stitched under the wings, and Tomas felt his stomach drop through the floor. Because Tomas was the one prospect in that chapter who had done his homework, who had studied the history, who knew every name on that charter wall by heart because he took this seriously, because to him it wasn't dress-up, it was something sacred. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Oh my God. You're Gunner." Silas looked up at him through the rain. He didn't say anything. "You're Gunner Rhodes, you're on the wall, you founded this. You." Tomas was already pulling out his phone with shaking hands. "Sir, don't move, okay? I'm calling the Nationals right now." "Son," Silas said quietly, "you don't want to be in the middle of this." "I'm already in the middle of it," Tomas said, and he made the call. Now here's where it turns. Because a call like that from a clubhouse about a founder being thrown out into the mud does not stay small. It goes up the chain fast. It went to the chapter president, a man named Dutch who was 40 miles away at a birthday dinner. Dutch stood up so fast he knocked his chair over. It went to the regional officer. And it went all the way up to the national vice president, a legend in his own right. A man named Bishop who had ridden his first mile as a teenager holding onto the back of Gunner Rhodes's bike. Bishop was 2 hours out. He got on his motorcycle in the rain without finishing the sentence he was speaking. and a dozen men rode with him. But 2 hours is a long time, and inside that clubhouse the boys had gotten louder. And Tomas made the mistake of coming back in wet and pale, and saying the words out loud. "Do you know who that is out there? Do you have any idea who you just threw out?" Cade turned from the pool table, cue in his hand. "Some old man in a stolen cut." "That's Gunnar Rhodes," Tomas said. "That's the first road captain. That's the first name on the charter, on our wall, right there." He pointed with a shaking finger at the framed glass. "You put your boot in the chest of the man who founded this chapter." For a second, just a second, the room went still. A couple of the boys glanced at the wall. Somebody set down a bottle, and then Cade laughed, but it was a different laugh now, nervous underneath. "You're full of it, that old wreck. No way." "Go read it yourself," Tomas said. Cade didn't go read it, because a part of him already believed it, and the part of him that believed it was afraid, and fear in a young man like Cade doesn't come out as caution. It comes out as more meanness. If it was true, then Cade had made a mistake so big it could end him. And if he could just make it not true, if he could just make that old man go away before anyone important arrived, then maybe it never happened at all. "He's not staying," Cade said. "Founder or not, nobody's coming out here in this storm. It's his word against ours." He set down the cue. "We put him back in his truck and he drives off, and this is nothing. This never happened." And that was the moment. That was the moment the whole thing changed shape, because it stopped being about a rude old man and a proud young one. It stopped being about a stolen cut or hurt pride. Cade looked at Tomas, and Tomas understood with a cold drop in his gut exactly what was being said. Cade didn't want to fix his mistake. He wanted to bury it. "And you don't bury a witness by tucking him into his truck." Tomas backed toward the door. "What are you saying, man?" "I'm saying," Cade said slowly, "that nobody needs to know anything. As long as everybody in this room keeps their mouth shut. Everybody." The nature of the night had turned. This was no longer a story about disrespect. Now it was a story about survival. An old man out in the mud, a frightened young prospect, and a room full of boys being asked to protect a lie with silence. If you've ever seen good men stay quiet because they were scared, you know how fast a thing like this can go bad. And if you're still with me, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because the next part is the part I've been waiting to tell you. Tomas ran. He shoved through the door into the storm before anyone could grab him, and he dropped down in the mud beside the old man and the dog. "They're not going to let you go," he said. "Cade, he's talking crazy. He wants to make this disappear. We have to get you out of here." Silas Rhodes looked at the boy, and for the first time all night, something moved behind his tired eyes. Not fear. Something harder and older than fear. "No," he said, "we're not running. Sir, there's 8 of them. I've been outnumbered before." He got a hand on Tomas's shoulder and pulled himself up slow until he was standing in the rain on his bad leg, leaning on that cane. "Help me back inside." "Back inside? They just threw you out." "I know." Silas wiped the rain from his face. "That's exactly why I'm going back in." Now understand something. Silas Rhodes was not going back in there to fight. His fighting days were 40 years behind him. He knew that. But he also knew something those boys had never learned because nobody had ever taught them. He knew that a club is not the men in the room. It's the code. And the code was still his, the same as it had always been. He'd written it into that charter with his own hand. He pushed the door open and stepped back into the light, dripping, leaning on his cane, the old dog limping in at his heel. The music was still playing. Somebody killed it. Cade turned around, and his face went from surprise to anger to something close to panic all in about 2 seconds. "You've got a lot of nerve," he said. So I've been told. Silas walked, slow and steady, into the middle of the room. Every eye followed him. He stopped in front of the wall of names. He reached up with one shaking hand and touched the glass over the charter, right where his own name was written in ink gone brown. I signed this in 1971, he said, in a garage in Barstow that isn't there anymore. There were 9 of us. I was the road captain. I planned the first run this chapter ever made, 400 miles. We lost 2 men that year, not to the road. To men who wanted us gone. He turned and looked at Cade. You want to talk to me about earning a patch, son? I've buried more brothers than you've met. Cade's jaw worked. He didn't have an answer, but a cornered animal doesn't need an answer. It just needs a way out. And Cade's way out was still the same: make it disappear. Grab him, Cade said. Nobody moved. I said grab him. Ricky took one step, and then Silas said, think real careful about the next thing you do, son, because in about an hour Bishop is going to walk through that door. You know that name? Bishop, National VP. He watched it land on their faces. It landed hard. He learned to ride on the back of my bike. And when he gets here and finds out you laid hands on me twice, praying don't help you. Ricky stopped. He looked at Cade. He looked at the wall, and you could see the exact second the fear tipped the other way. He backed off, but Cade didn't. Cade grabbed a pool cue and snapped it over his knee, and now he had a jagged piece of wood in his fist and his eyes were wild. Nobody's coming, he said. Nobody's coming in this storm. It's just us. And you're just an old man who fell in the mud and hit his head, and that's the whole story. He came across the room fast, and this is the part I told you about. This is the payoff. Silas Rhodes was 74 years old with a bad leg and a bad heart, but some things don't leave a man. Cade swung that broken cue at Silas's head, and the old man moved, not fast, but exactly, the way you move when you've done a thing 10,000 times, and the cue went past him, and Silas caught Cade's wrist with a grip that stopped the boy cold. For 1 second, Cade felt it. The grip of a man who'd held onto handlebars at 100 miles an hour through desert wind for 50 years. A grip that had pulled brothers out of wrecks. It wasn't young, but it was iron, and it did not let go. Diesel, Silas said, guard. And that old dog, who couldn't run anymore, lunged the last thing he had and sank his teeth into Cade's leg. Cade screamed and swung the cue down at the dog, and that was his mistake, because it took his eyes off Silas. And Silas twisted the boy's wrist the way he'd twisted 100 wrists in 100 bar fights back when it mattered. And Cade went down onto the floor with the old man's cane pressed across the back of his neck. Stay down, Silas said. He wasn't even breathing hard. You hear me? Stay down, it's over. But it wasn't the cane that ended it. It was the sound. Motorcycles, a lot of them, coming up the road through the storm, engines roaring over the thunder, headlights cutting through the rain and sweeping across the windows. Not 2 hours. Bishop hadn't ridden the long way. He'd ridden like the devil was behind him, and he'd called every man between here and there, and now the parking lot filled up with bikes, 20, 30 of them, patched members from 3 chapters, and the door blew open. Bishop walked in first. 60 years old, gray beard, a full sleeve of faded ink, and a face like a closed fist. He took in the whole room in one look. The old man standing. The dog, the boy on the floor, the broken cue. And then Bishop saw Silas Rhodes's face, really saw it, and 40 years fell off of him. His voice cracked when he spoke. Gunner. Hello, Bishop, Silas said. You got tall. Bishop crossed that room in 4 steps, and he did not shake Silas's hand. He wrapped both arms around the old man and held onto him, and this huge, terrifying man had tears running down into his beard. I thought you were gone, he said. I thought you were gone years ago. Nobody knew where you went. I went quiet, Silas said. Figured the club didn't need an old ghost hanging around. Bishop pulled back, and then he saw the mud, the blood on Silas's temple, the way the old man was leaning on that cane because he couldn't stand up straight, and Bishop's face changed into something that made every young man in that room go cold. He turned around, very slowly. Who did this? Nobody spoke. I am going to ask one time. Which one of you put your hands on the man who founded this chapter? Cade was still on the floor. And Silas took his cane off the boy's neck and stepped back and let him up. Bishop looked down at Cade, and the whole story was written on the kid's face, the fear and the guilt and the mud. Bishop didn't yell. That was the worst part. He got very quiet. You, Bishop said, you threw Gunnar Rhodes into the rain. Now here's where the story could have gone one way and went another, because Bishop was ready to do something in that room that could not be undone. You could see it. Every man could see it. And Cade knew it too, and he started to talk fast, started to beg, and it was ugly. And it was Silas who stopped it. Bishop, one word, the old road captain's voice. And the national vice president of the whole thing stopped, because some kinds of authority never expire. Look at me. Bishop looked. I didn't come back here to watch you kill a stupid kid, Silas said. You do that, you're no better than the men we buried our brothers fighting. You want to honor the code I wrote. Then you do this right, not with your fists, with the rules. Bishop breathed. His shoulders came down an inch, and he nodded, because Gunnar Rhodes was right, and he'd been right about things like this for 50 years, and that was exactly why his name was on that wall, so they did it right. There in the clubhouse, in front of every patched member who'd come through the storm, they held a meeting the old way. Cade was made to stand in the center. And one by one, the boys who'd been there told the truth of what happened, because with the nationals in the room, nobody was keeping Cade's secret anymore. The mocking, the boot, the mud, the talk of making it disappear. And when it was all out, Silas himself spoke. He walked to the center of the room and stood beside the boy who'd tried to bury him. I'm not going to ask you to throw him out, Silas said to Bishop and to all of them. Because that's what he did to me, and it didn't teach him anything. Anybody can throw a man out, takes nothing. Any coward can do it. He turned to Cade. You've got no idea what these colors cost, not the dues, the cost, the nights we didn't sleep, the funerals. The men who died so that you could stand in a warm room and play pool and feel like somebody. You spat on all of that tonight, and you didn't even know it, because you never once bothered to read the wall behind your own head. Cade was crying now, not the fake begging from before, real. Here's what I want, Silas said. I want him stripped down to nothing, not out, down, back to the bottom, zero. And I want him to spend the next year learning the name of every man on that charter, learning what each of them did, learning what it means. And if at the end of that year he still doesn't understand, then he was never going to, and you let him go quiet. But you give him the chance to become the thing he only pretended to be. That's the code. Not throwing men in the rain, lifting them up when they don't deserve it, because somebody once did it for you. The room was dead silent. Then Bishop nodded slow. It's Gunnar's call, he said. It's always been Gunnar's call. And that was that. Cade dropped to his knees in front of the old man. He couldn't even get words out. Silas put a hand on the boy's shoulder, the same hand that had stopped the cue. Get up, he said gently. Men in this club don't kneel to anybody, not even me. Get up and start earning it. The storm blew itself out before dawn. That's how desert storms go. All that rage, and then the sky opens up clean and quiet like nothing ever happened. They put Silas Rhodes in the best chair in the clubhouse and cleaned the cut on his temple and got him dry clothes and hot coffee, and the old dog lay at his feet by a heater. And for the first time in a long time, Diesel was warm and Silas was among his own. They pulled the charter down off the wall, cracked glass and all, and passed it around, and Silas told the stories behind it. The names, the 9 of them, who each man was. How 2 of them died young, and how one of them turned out to be the finest human being Silas ever knew. The boys who'd laughed at him a few hours before sat on the floor around his chair like children and listened, and they didn't say a word, because for the first time they understood that everything they had, this room, these colors, the brotherhood they'd taken for granted, had been paid for in advance by men they'd never bothered to learn about. Tomas sat closest, and Bishop pulled the boy aside near the end and told him quietly that a prospect who'd read the wall, who'd known the name, who'd run out into the storm to protect a fallen founder when it would have been easier and safer to stay quiet, that was the kind of man this thing was built on. Tomas would wear a full patch before the year was out. He'd earned it in one night in the rain. Cade came over before Silas left. He'd been up all night. He knelt down, then remembered and stood back up. "I don't know how to make it right," he said. "You can't," Silas told him. "Not tonight, that's not how it works. You make it right one day at a time for years, and maybe you never fully do, and you keep going anyway. That's the whole thing, son. That's what nobody told you." He looked at the boy for a long moment. "You've got something in you. I saw it when you came at me. It's just pointed the wrong way. Turn it around. Point it at protecting people instead of scaring them. You do that, you'll be worth 10 of what you were tonight." Cade nodded. He couldn't speak. Bishop wanted Silas to come back, to take an honorary seat, to ride in the front again, to be the living memory of the whole chapter. And Silas thought about it. He really did, but he shook his head. "I'm an old man, Bishop. My writing's done. My truck barely runs and my dog's on his last legs, same as me." He smiled a little. "But I'll tell you what, you keep that wall clean. You make every prospect learn those names before they get a patch, every single one. You make sure nobody who wears these colors ever again walks past those men without knowing what they gave. You do that, and I don't need a seat. That's my seat. Right there on the wall. That's where I've been the whole time." They fixed his truck. Of course they did. A dozen guys who could rebuild an engine in their sleep had it running in 20 minutes. They filled the tank. They put food in the cab for the road and food for the dog. And when Silas Rhodes drove off into that clean desert morning, 30 motorcycles rode with him, front and back and either side, an honor escort for a man they'd thrown in the mud 8 hours before. They rode with him all the way to the county line, engines thundering in the quiet, and then they peeled off one by one and let him go on alone the way he wanted, the way he'd always gone. Bishop was the last to break off. He rode up alongside the old truck's window and held up 2 fingers off the handlebar, the old salute, the one from the charter days that almost nobody remembered anymore. And Silas lifted 2 fingers back off the steering wheel. And then Bishop was gone in the mirror, and it was just Silas and Diesel and the open road, the way it started, the way it was always going to end. Now here's the thing I want you to take from all this. That night a room full of young men looked at an old man and saw nothing. Worn leather, a cane, a bad leg. They saw somebody weak, somebody who didn't matter, somebody they could push around because he couldn't push back. And they were wrong in the biggest way a person can be wrong. Because the man they threw into the rain had built the very ground they were standing on. You never know who you're looking at. That grandfather nobody listens to at the dinner table. That quiet old man at the end of the bar. That worn-out veteran who moves too slow at the checkout line. Every one of them was young once. Every one of them did things you can't imagine and paid prices you'll never see. And the way you treat them when you think they're nobody, when you think nobody's watching, when you think they can't do anything about it, that tells the whole truth about who you are. Silas Rhodes died 2 winters later, quiet in his sleep, an old man in a small house with a photograph of 9 young riders on the wall. Diesel had gone a few months before him. And when the word went out, the road from Barstow filled up with motorcycles for 20 miles, thousands of them, riders who'd never met him but knew the name now because Bishop had kept his promise, and every prospect in that chapter and a dozen others had learned to say it with respect. Gunner Rhodes, first road captain, the man who never once broke the code. They buried him in his cut, the faded one, the one those boys had almost torn off his back. And at the front of that endless line of riders, wearing a full patch now and leading the whole procession, was a man named Cade, who had spent every day of the years between earning the right to be there, one day at a time, exactly like the old man told him to. He never did fully make it right. Silas told him he wouldn't. But he spent his whole life trying, and in the end, that was the point. That was always the point. And every new prospect who came through that clubhouse door got walked straight to the wall, first thing, before anything else, and got told the story of the old man in the rain, and the dog who wouldn't leave his side, and the boys who learned the hardest way there is that you should never, ever judge a man by how slow he walks.